Hello, my random viewers, and welcome to Randomly Offensive. Today, we will be continuing the story of genetic blessings in Part 1, Chapter 6. And if you have missed the previous chapters, they will be linked right here, right now, at the tippy top of this video if you want to clickety on them. And come on back, that'll be just fine with me. So, without further ado, let's continue Genetic Blessings with Part 1, Chapter 6. Vince and Al have been paired up to go on a mission to take out a genetic blessing, and as Vince is walking down the street, smoking his cigarette, he is getting more and more annoyed at the non-stop talking of Al, as Al has moved from conversation to conversation. However, the conversations have only been with himself, since Vince has decided to ignore him quite some time ago, and he looks up the corner of his eye as Al is speaking. You know, I actually have wondered where the serial killer manages to go after he hits his target. He just poofs and disappears. We have never been able to catch this guy, says Al. You know, I should have connected the dots right away that he was a genetic blessing, but the whole idea is still kind of new to me, and I wonder why every genetic blessing seems to become an awful criminal, says Al, with Vince still staring at him out of the corner of his eye.
Yes, Mel is quite the serial killer, and it'll be fun taking him out. However, do we really need to talk about every detail of every moment in this passing day? Says Vince, with Al looking at him. Well, I mean, you're not talking, and looking for this guy could become really boring if neither one of us says anything, he says, with Vince now looking away from him. Or it would be quite peaceful. I enjoy a little bit of quiet every now and then,
he says as he continues walking, puffing on his cigarette even more aggressively than usual, with Al shrugging his shoulders. So, you know, Jim has like this really cool system where he manages to investigate and pinpoint where the genetic blessing's about to be, and then we just go in guns blazing and take the bastard out, says Al, with Vince looking back at him once more.
That is not how I do things. We are going to find him my way, and we're not going in guns blazing, says Vince. We are simply going to talk to the man, and the second he becomes distracted, you are going to stab him with the electricity.
Right, because he's an electric weakness, aggressive type, right? But, Jasmine said something about him being able to move really fast. Does that mean his genetic blessing, like, gave him super speed or something? I don't know how we're gonna beat that. And how are you gonna distract him? Are you gonna, like, just bar brawl him and then I sneak up behind him or something? Says Al, with Vince ignoring him as they approach a building. And Vince walks in, and Al sees that they have entered an apartment complex as Vince walks to the clerk.
Hello, and good morning. I was wondering if Mel was in today,
he says to the clerk as the clerk looks up at Vince. No, I don't believe so. I believe he left. Do you want me to leave a message? And Vince shakes his head.
No, that's quite all right. I'll catch up with him some other time,
he says, as he then begins walking up the stairs in the apartment and Al following him. So, just exactly how is it that you know this guy's name? And also, how is it that you know where he lives? We have been hunting this serial killer ever since I first joined the force. How is it you know this information? Says Al, with Vince deciding to answer him, hoping that it will shut him up.
Alex did all the hard footwork for me. She has a way of collecting information, and she is why I know where the man lives. And now,
he says, as he kicks open one of the doors in the apartment complex,
we wait.
Meanwhile, the chief walks down the streets with Jim walking behind him out of respect.
So, why is it that you've paired up with me? I can't remember the last time I've teamed up with you,
says Jim. However, the chief ignores him, and so Jim decides not to ask any questions and continues following the chief as they finally approach a building that looks like some type of school or orphanage.
Pull out your scanner, Jim, and point it at the building,
says the chief. And so Jim reaches in his pocket and pulls out his scanner, and as he points it at the building, it starts going frantic and reading dozens and then hundreds of genetic blessings with all sorts of varieties, with the types and threat levels. As Jim looks at it,
what the hell is this? Some type of genetic blessing hideout?
He says to the chief.
No, it is not a hideout. It is an orphanage. An orphanage full of genetic blessing children being protected by Vince. This is one of Vince's many orphanages that holds an entire generation of genetic blessings. A generation that will soon grow and challenge the very fabrics of humanity and change the world as we know it, says the chief, with Jim now putting the scanner back in his pocket. Okay, and exactly why are you showing me this?
Says Jim, with the chief looking at him seriously.
I am showing you this because, as of tomorrow, we are going to destroy this building and eradicate every single genetic blessing inside,
says the chief, with Jim not knowing what the right response is.
With all due respect, Chief, I don't think that is a good idea. I think that we need to go about this a little differently. If we do what you're wanting to do, Vince will turn on us again. And though I've yet to forgive him, I understand why he turned on us the first time. And he's an incredible asset for hunting down more dangerous genetic blessings.
And the chief, still looking at Jim.
More dangerous than hundreds, maybe even thousands of genetic blessings that will soon grow up and begin fighting for their rightful place in society,
says the chief, as Jim does not know how to respond. Vince and Al are sitting in the apartment of their target, waiting for Mel to return. As Al is looking out the window, Vince is calmly sitting on one of the chairs, smoking a cigarette. As Al looks out the windows, you know, You killed a genetic blessing using your bare hands, says Al. And then Alex managed to kill Caroline with a knife, he says, as Vince is intrigued at the words of Al.
Yeah? So what? What does that have to do with anything?
Says Vince, and Al looks back at him. Well, Jim and Jasmine taught me from day one that the only way to take out genetic blessings was by using their weaknesses, by using the spear, says Al, with Vince smirking at him.
No, not exactly. You see, those spears are similar to lots of other technologies where certain things were done without them in the past, but now, if you were to try to do the same thing in today's society, it'd be near impossible. It would take too long, and society doesn't allow you to spend that much time, so you are forced to use that technology. And because of that, many people don't know how to do those things without the technology,
says Vince, and so Al looks at him. Okay, but Caroline's weakness wasn't a knife, it was sound, he says. And Vince, putting out his cigarette and lighting up another one almost immediately.
It is quite simple, Al. Genetic blessings are nothing more than advanced human beings. They are susceptible to all the same things that can kill us. However, it's far, far harder. And they have enhanced weaknesses. The mentalist's weakness is sound, yes, because half the time you can't get close enough to them to kill them with a knife. But if you can get them while they're distracted, like Alex did with Caroline, then a knife wound and a stab to the back will absolutely take one down,
says Vince, as Al nods. I guess that does make sense, he says, as they hear footsteps entering the apartment, and as they look towards the doorway, there stands their target, Mel. What are you doing here? He says. What are you guys doing in my apartment? He begins asking frantically, but then when he looks over and sees Vince,
whoa, are you Vince Caballero?
He says, with Al being confused. You know him? Says Al, and the man looks back.
Well, yeah, I don't know very many genetic blessings that don't know Vince, he says.
And Vince stands up with a smile.
Yes, I am Vince Caballero, and I've been meaning to talk to you. Here, come closer,
says Vince, as Mel happily comes closer to Vince. Vince looks at Al and uses his forehead to signal Al to walk around the man, and so Al knows exactly what's about to happen and nonchalantly walks behind the man.
What is your number?
Says Vince as he pulls out his phone, and Mel looks at him. My number? Oh, geez. Well, that is it's 589-402-2261. Says Mel as Vince begins typing the man's number in his phone. Al slowly pulls out his fully condensed spear and quietly expands it to full size as he gets ready to stab Mel in the back. And Vince then sends Mel a text as Mel quickly grabs the phone out of his pocket and looks at the text. It is from Vince's number, and the text reads, "You have killed far too many people, and your time has come. I'm sorry it had to happen this way." Read the text as Mel looks up at Vince. "Wait, what?" he says, as Al quickly hits the button with electricity shooting down the rod, and he forces the spear into the back of Mel, with Mel's body becoming fully engulfed in electricity. He screams in pain, and his body self-destructs, with the orb floating away. Al grabs it and holds it close. "I deny your acceptance," says Al, and the orb vanishes, with Vince lighting up another cigarette and begins walking out. "You know, I almost felt bad for the guy," said Al. "If he wasn't a serial killer, I actually wouldn't have liked taking him out that way. He seemed so happy," says Al, with Vince ignoring him, and the two of them return to the GBA. The Chief and Jim have returned to the GBA far before Vince and Al, and in Vince's absence, Jim makes his way to the room of Jasmine and knocks on the door while opening it simultaneously, with Jasmine simply reading a book. He looks at her.
"Hey, Jasmine, I have something very important I must discuss with you,"
he says, and Jasmine looks at him and sees that he is troubled, so she closes her book and sets it down on her nightstand. "Alrighty, what do you need to talk about?" she says, and so Jim closes the door behind him and locks it. And Jasmine notices that this is abnormal behavior for Jim, and Jim walks over to her and sits on the edge of her bed beside her.
"The Chief has found an orphanage that is owned by Vince,"
says Jim, with Jasmine getting concerned about where this is going and was hoping no one would know about the orphanage. "Okay," she says. What's gonna be done about it?" And Jim gives a big sigh.
"Well, I know that our job forces us to do things we don't want to do. I know that our job and making sure humanity is preserved, that we must take out genetic blessings who do not deserve it, kill the innocent, even if that means children, but taking out that many doesn't strike me as the right thing to do,"
he says, and Jasmine nodding her head in agreement. "Okay. Well, are you talking to me for an answer?" she says, and he looks at her.
"I'm talking to you for advice. If we go along with this, we will ensure that an entire generation is eradicated before they have a chance to destroy humanity. But Vince will betray us. He will turn on us for doing such a heinous act, and it'll be like 5 years ago all over again. And I don't know how many of you I can protect from the likes of Vince, especially after doing something like that. Not only that," he says, "but the chief said something that didn't seem right."
And Jasmine now getting interested. "Okay, and what was that?"
"Well, he said that we must stop this generation from growing up and fighting for their rightful place in the world.
Okay, what's wrong with that? Replies Jasmine.
He used the words rightful place. Not overthrow, not challenge, not eradicate, not start war or rebel. He said rightful place. Do you think that the chief is afraid that the genetic blessings might actually belong? Do you think that we've been doing the right thing? Or was Vince the one that was in the right?
Says Jim, and Jasmine just looks at him. I don't know how to answer that, she says. I don't know what you want me to say.
I want you to make the decision. Do we trust that Vince is right? Do we trust that Vince is truly trying to do what's right? Should we trust that the genetic blessings will allow humanity to coexist? Or should we trust the chief? The decision is yours, Jasmine, and whichever one you make, I will follow to the ends of the earth, because I just don't know anymore.
And Jasmine sits in silence watching Jim, now not knowing what decision to make. Vince and Al return to the GBA. However, they don't even make it past the abandoned building disguise. And there stands Jasmine, Jim, Jake, and even Alex, awaiting for their return.
What's this? What's going on?
He says, with Al too curious. And Jasmine walks up to him. The chief has found and discovered the orphanage, she says, with Vince's eyes getting wide and then looking over to Alex as Alex nods at him in confirmation.
Okay, and why are you guys here right now?
He says, and Jake looks up.
Because we've decided that it is a line that we're not willing to cross, and we will side with you to prevent it from happening.
And Vince looks at Jim.
Prevent what? Prevent what from happening?
He says, with Jasmine putting her hand on Vince's shoulder, with Al seeing the compassion she shows him, and she looks at him. First thing tomorrow morning, the chief is going to blow up the orphanage, killing every single child in there, she says. And so Vince, looking at the group,
well, then I need to stop him. But you realize you guys are going to be a target by every other GBA unit?
We are prepared for the consequences, Vince, says Jasmine. And so Vince nods his head and begins walking towards the elevator. And as he enters the elevator, he looks at the group, who is starting to follow him.
No, you guys stay there. I'm going to be right back,
he says as he closes the elevator. And Al looks at Jasmine. Why wasn't I a part of the discussion? I didn't get to make a decision, says Al, as Jake and Jim look at Al.
Do you want to kill children, or do you want to go rogue?
Says Jim, with Al looking at Jim. Yeah, okay. No, killing kids isn't really my forte. I'll go rogue, he says, with Jasmine smirking at him, "You're an idiot," she says, as Vince exits the elevator and walks to the office of the chief. He opens the door, and the office is empty. And so he walks to the table and sees a note upon the table of the chief's office. "You better hurry," reads the note, with Vince punching the table. "No, no, 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 no," says Vince as he runs frantically into the elevator and returns to the group.
We need to go. He's not doing it in the morning. He's doing it now."
What do you mean?" says Jasmine. However, Vince doesn't respond nor wait as he runs into his car without hesitation and without waiting for the rest of them to join him. He slams on the gas and flies towards the orphanage with the rest of the group standing back. "I think we need to follow him," says Al. "No shit," says Alex in response. Jasmine looking back at Alex. "You said that the chief is a manipulation-type genetic blessing that has managed to go undetected. Is that right?" says Jasmine. And Alex nods her head. "Yeah, he's a manipulation type, and he is one of the most powerful genetic blessings. Or maybe even the most powerful genetic blessing. We're not going to be able to defeat him, and Vince is going to die if he tries," says Alex, hugging her computer case, with Al crossing his arms looking down. "I feel like I missed a lot, but," he says, "the chief is a genetic blessing. He's been in the GBA. Shit. He's the guy that's been climbing he's the genetic blessing that's been climbing the ranks," says Al, as Jim slowly claps his hands.
"Fantastic job. You figured it out, Sherlock. Alrighty. Alex, you said there was a way to defeat a manipulation type, even though no one's ever heard of one."
And Alex nods. "Yeah, it's called the God Orb. It is the only God-type genetic blessing. However, finding it could take years. We don't have years," she responds. Vince panicking, slamming the gas pedal down as much as possible as the car speeds and races to the orphanage. He slams on the brakes before he drives the car into the building and rushes out of the car. As he kicks in the door, he sees the chief standing before him with all the children huddled in fear along the walls and in the corners, with all the caretakers lying on the ground, covered in blood, with the blood covering the hands of the chief. "So, Vince, I believe the time has come for everything to finally begin," says the chief, as Vince's force field begins covering his entire body, and Vince begins to glow a bright blue, with his platinum blonde hair becoming more of a silver, and his teeth grinding. "Are you dumb enough to take me on, Vince?" says the chief, with Vince looking up with nothing but anger in his eyes.
"I am dumb enough to take you on now, old man. I am going to kill you where you stand," says Vince, and the chief smiles. "Well then, bring it on," says the chief. And Vince charges at the chief and throws a massive punch directly into the face, connecting to the jawline of Chief. However, besides knocking off his glasses, the Chief is completely unharmed and has barely moved as he pulls his face back, pressing Vince's punch backwards. He picks up Vince by the chest effortlessly and slams him down to the ground. As Vince bounces off the ground, his force field becomes rattled, and Vince quickly stands back up and throws another punch connecting to the jawline of the Chief, but again, it has no effect. So the Chief then simply snaps his fingers as a giant shockwave comes from his hands and blasts Vince through the wall of the orphanage, sending him flying outside. As he rolls and tumbles through the ground, the Chief begins walking towards Vince. And so Vince forms his force field into a ball as he throws it as hard as he can to the Chief. However, the Chief catches it effortlessly with one hand and throws it back as it connects to the face of Vince, causing his force field to crack, blowing Vince backwards. However, Vince stands up once more.
"You son of a bitch! You're not gonna win!"
says Vince as he charges at the Chief and delivers a roundhouse directly into the skull. However, once again, it has no effect, and Vince begins throwing punch after punch at the Chief with such massive force the ground begins to shake, and the Chief is just allowing every strike to connect with no effect to himself whatsoever. And he then places one finger on the forehead of Vince and pushes Vince ever so gently. However, this causes Vince to go flying backwards, rolling and tumbling across the ground again. Vince grabs a hold of a moving car, and using his force field to give him the strength he needs, he picks up the car.
"Get out!"
he says to the driver, and so the driver opens the door and falls out of the now hoisted up car, and he throws it at the Chief, which the Chief manages to catch it just as effortlessly as he caught the force field ball, and he slams it into the ground, looking at Vince.
"This is fun, but you're obviously out of your league, and it is time,"
he says as he looks at his watch, and the sky becomes covered in smoke as the GBA lab has shot off a rocket that is now airborne.
"Is that a missile?"
says Vince, jaw dropped, as the Chief nods.
Yes it is. You have two choices, Vince. Either run to save your life, or do whatever you can to save the lives of your precious genetic blessings,
he says as Vince runs to the building and places both of his hands upon the walls and starts projecting his force field upon the building. With the missile getting closer and closer, the force field slowly wraps around the bottom of the building, and with Vince causing the very ground to shake with the pure force he is applying onto the building, the force field is slowly engulfing the building as it ever so slowly
begins climbing up.
I have to do this. I have to make this work. I have to save them. It has to go faster,
He says as he begins to scream and yell at the top of his lungs, forcing this force field to rise the building as fast as possible. And the missile is getting closer and closer, with the force field almost making it to the top. The missile connects to the top of the building, where the force field has yet to reach. And upon the explosion, the flames run down the building as the building ignites in a massive explosion. It blows the force field apart, sending Vince flying backwards and across the street. As Vince is no longer protected by his force field, he can feel multiple broken bones upon his body, and the chief looks at Vince.
I'm sorry, Vince, but I don't see myself getting an opportunity to kill you with such a minor, measly weapon. You are defenseless,
He says as he pulls out a revolver and points it at Vince.
This was fun!
you bastard.
He says to the chief as tears run down his face.
How could you? How could you?
How could I what?
Responds the chief.
How could I eradicate those that may grow up to overthrow me? How could I get rid of any threat to my perfect world? It's simple,
He says as he pulls back the hammer.
by just pulling the trigger.
And as the chief pulls the trigger on the revolver, the gun goes off, and Vince is then tackled by Jim, being protected by the bullet. However, Jim sees his suit being covered in blood. As Jim is gasping for air, Vince looks at his friend.
No, no, you idiot!
He yells at Jim. Al, Jasmine, Alex, and Jake have all finally caught up just in time to see the orphanage engulfed in flames, with the chief standing in front of it, and Jim suffering from the gunshot that went right into his chest as he struggles to breathe, and Alex looking at the orphanage. No, this wasn't a part of the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen, she says, with Jasmine running to Jim to try to save him as he's gasping for air with Vince above him.
You fucking fool. You weren't supposed to do that,
says Vince, with Jim looking at him.
You said it yourself. I'm the guardian, the protector. It was my job to save you,
responds Jim as he struggles to breathe, forcing the words to come out, with Jake frozen at the sight of his best friend. Struggling to stay alive, he grabs his spear and begins to run towards the chief, with Al yelling at him to stop, and Vince and Jasmine getting their attention taken off from Jim due to Al's shouts, sees Jake trying to attack the chief. However, the chief simply dodges the spear and grabs Jake by the throat and picks him up.
I'm going to give all of you a warning, and then I'm going to give you a chance to run,
says the chief as he squeezes the throat of Jake, with Jake struggling, and a snap can be heard from Jake's neck as the chief drops Jake's dead body onto the ground. He looks at the rest of them, with Jasmine grasping her spear and Al grasping his. Vince looks at Jasmine.
I don't want to lose any more lives today,
He says as he slowly stands up and pulls out a cigarette. And with his hands shaking almost too much for him to light the cigarette, he finally gets it lit as he inhales the smoke.
We are going to go now. Alex, Jasmine, Al, we need to run,
he says as sirens can be heard in the distance. And Jasmine looks at Jim, who now has no pulse, and stands up with Alex and Al walking up to them.
Run! Run so that I can fight you another day,
says the chief as the group runs off. It has been 3 days since the events, and the chief sits in the White House waiting for the president, who slams the doors open.
What the hell happened? What the hell went down in Nevada?
He screams at the chief.
This is a shitstorm and I have to try to clean it up now.
He continues as he is pointing his finger at the chief, who is simply cleaning his glasses.
Well, Caroline had failed the assassination, and the GBA unit, Jasmine, Jim, Jake, and Al retaliated and sent a missile right into an orphanage full of innocent children with the clear message that they have decided to wage war on the GBA.
You said you had this handled, replies the president, but now I have to do it.
Well, what exactly is your plans, Mr. President?
Asks the chief.
That's a simple one. A $12 billion reward for anyone who can bring me the heads of Sector 47 of the GBA. I have sent out a worldwide contract, and they are going to be hunted down for the rest of their lives, says the president.
And so the contract is sent throughout the entire world as laptops and phones to every unit of the GBA, and every assassin who is a genetic blessing begins receiving the contract with the biggest reward in history of $12 billion to assassinate Vince, Al, Jasmine, and Alex as a man in a cowboy hat, button-up shirt, and blue jeans receives the contract. He smiles at it and accepts, while another man in a hooded garment with his face covered in many scarves receives the contract on his phone. He too accepts.
Well, that is going to be fun with Vince Caballero,
says the hooded man, as a 9-foot-tall giant with a much smaller man on his shoulder also receives the contract as they accept, and a man covered in ice who sits at a computer, receives the contract on his monitor. Vince Caballero, is it? Along with Jasmine. Well, this'll be lots of fun, responds the iced, frosted man as he accepts the contract with two sisters who are all in a bar, and they hear their phones going off as they smile at each other and hit the accept on the contract. And finally, a man who walks the streets of London in a nice tailored suit with a cane and fedora feels his phone vibrating as he pulls it out and sees the $12 billion contract. Well, Vince Caballero and Alex, I wonder who's actually dumb enough to accept this contract, he says to himself. I'll just put this in my back pocket. Who knows? Someday I might become bored, says the man as he walks away with his cane. And the $12 billion contract has been activated, and Vince, Jasmine, Al, and Alex have become prey to countless GBA units and mercenaries. And that is part 1 of Genetic Blessings, and I do have a script for part 2. However, I don't have a script for each individual video or each individual chapter. I just have a broad script for the majority of part 2. So I am absolutely going to have to work and get more scripts put together for part 2. And if you're interested, absolutely keep your eye out for it, because I will be dropping it most likely within the week. And yeah, hopefully it turns out good. If you guys have listened for this long, thank you very much. Do take care of yourselves. Do not get hit by a meteor. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button, and bye.